Hello everyone, I am Uriah Heep, and this is Uriah Heep's Literary Cafe. And tonight we present the next chapter in the Great American Novel Series, brought to you by The Author's Matrix. In the last chapter, Chapter 5 of our current book, which is The Village Idiot by Dan Blanchfield, Jake Halzapel came on the scene and made our hero, Addison Way's life much more difficult. Well, at the end of Chapter 5, we learn that Edmund is ill. We'll find out how Addison's dad does in Chapter 6. So, without any further ado, let's listen to Chapter 6 of The Village Idiot.
Chapter 6. Edmund Way leaned back in his chair as he allowed his words to fall upon his son. He wished to see the dramatic effect they would have, and hopefully would stir him in a way that might alter his foolishness. Edmund wanted to be buried knowing his son's life was safe and prosperous. He had been feeling more ill than usual of late, but had kept that knowledge from his wife and son. Now, he felt the revelation would alter the disastrous path of his son's life. As Addison slumped back in his chair, his mother rushed to her husband's side, embracing him while she gently sobbed. She had known her husband's health had been deteriorating of late, as she had buried all her children, save Addison, and knew the signs of imminent passing all too well. There had been no words spoken between the two, but they were together in mind always, and no comments were necessary. Addison attempted to broach the silence as he leaned forward to join his mother in embracing his father. Edmund welcomed his son's touch and held him close. A moment passed, and Edmund released his remaining family and sought to explain himself further. Adele and Addison sat back in silence. "I have not felt well for some time," Edmund began. "My sores have worsened even as I have repeatedly doused them with fresh sewer water. They grow and worsen each day as they become more grotesque and painful to the touch." As Addison listened to his father speak, he grew more angry than sad. Although he had grown up in a society where the use of raw sewer water was universal, he had never grown accustomed to its consumption, and his research had pointed to that very sewer water as the source of so many ills amongst the good people of the village of Crumbly and elsewhere. Yet, what could Addison say now that would not turn his father's pain into anger? "I am vomiting more than usual," Edmund continued, not noticing the growing anger in his only child sitting beside him. "I thought I might have caught some bug at first, but the vomiting has continued for weeks. It has kept me up at night." The fact that his father saw his constant vomiting as merely an extension of what he considered normal further angered Addison. He felt powerless, as his father's talk was interrupted by a coughing fit that discharged blood into his cupped hands. After wiping his pants with the blood, Edmund continued his confession to his family. "I have had a good life," Edmund continued, much to the horror of his wife and son. "It sounds as if you are ceding your life before us, father," Addison interjected. "It is not like you are confined to your deathbed tonight." Addison attempted to encourage his father by countering his deep pessimism with his words. He laid his hand on his father's shoulder and smiled. "You must promise me, Addison," his father said. "Promise your dying father that you will not waste your life on this." As he completed the sentence, Edmund stood up, walked across the kitchen, reached deep into a cabinet over the refrigerator, seized a cup of clear water, and returned to the table where his wife and son sat waiting for his return. He placed the water next to the cup of sewage water on the kitchen table and stared at his only begotten son. Addison froze, and his face turned red in embarrassment and anger. "Promise me, Addison," his father began slowly. that you will not waste the precious life God had granted you with this. Give a dying man his last wish. Addison felt his privacy had been violated. He knew that scoundrel, Jake Holzapfel, who had alerted his parents to his furtive scientific studies, held a secret in the shed outside the house. One could only imagine Jake's face as he spoke to his parents hours ago. It was evident to Addison that, although he did not divulge his scientific experiments to Jake and their location, he had said enough to arouse suspicion that he had passed on to his parents. "I am a scientist, Father," Addison began as he composed himself, and his courage strengthened considerably. "And I must follow that path." Edmund Way shook his head and looked down at the 2 glasses of water on the table before him. He reached for the glass of pure water and gently picked it up, holding it to the light. The glass was clear, and he could see straight through it as the overhead kitchen light shone dimly. "There is nothing here," Edmund began. "I do not see anything but the light above. The glass I hold in my hand contains nothing but air." He turned to his wife and continued, "Adele, my love, do you see anything in this glass I hold?" He held the glass of water close to his wife's face and turned it gently back and forth to emphasize its emptiness. He wished to have an ally in this fight with his son. Adele Way wished not to be drawn into this between her beloved husband and their son, but Edmund insisted she takes a stand. "Do you not agree, Adele," Edmund continued with an unrelenting zeal, "that this glass has nothing in it? Can you not see this with your own eyes, my love? The emptiness?" It was clear to everyone sitting at the kitchen table that evening that the family had come to a point where everyone must state definitively where they stood on the subject of water and Addison's future. Edmund was throwing down a philosophical gauntlet, and his wife and son must decide. "My dear Edmund," Adele began as she choked back tears, "I see a man who is ill and needs my loving care. That is all that I see." "But the water," Adele said. "Do you not see that I hold nothing in my hand? Do you not see that this empty glass is like our son's future? It is filled with nothingness." Adele's refusal to be drawn into her husband's argument did not sit well with Edmund or her son. Both wished that she would take their side, but she refused. She loved her son and husband and would not be the wedge that divided them into perpetuity. Adele had been raised in a world where sewer water was the same as life. No one ever questioned it among her family and friends, and she did not understand why her son would do so now. It was a decision she feared would ruin him and her family, yet she saw no way out of it. If she chose her son, they would be estranged for the rest of her life. But if she chose her husband, she would watch him go to his grave from afar. "Speak, woman," demanded Edmund as his patience grew thin. "The water. Answer me just this one time, Adele, about the water. What do you see?" Adele could not answer her husband and quietly stood up and left the room while Edmund fumed. Addison remained motionless, staring into space, hoping this torture would end soon. Edmund felt he could only make one last stand, exhausted from the argument. If only Addison would promise him to give up this quixotic quest, he would be satisfied to live out his remaining time snugly tucked in the womb of his family. Edmund finally placed the glass of clear, pure water on the table and sighed the sigh of a dying man. "There is no one, Addison." Edmund tried yet again. "No one in the world that holds your views. You do realize that, don't you, son?" Edmund paused. Addison did not stir but remained motionless. "How could you, of all people who have come from such humble beginnings, the son of a poor man, be the only person to question our ways? What is it that you know that no one else does? Can you answer that one question, son?" There was a tone in Edmund's voice that appeared to be a welcoming softening. Addison sensed that his father's anger had subsided, and there was a feeling of genuineness in the questions, rather than the vitriol of moments ago. Addison welcomed the softening tone of his father and said, "Father, I have watched my siblings and friends perish throughout my life. The medical establishment has also watched this tragedy unfold over countless generations. And what has been their response? Nothing. They sit back and observe while not questioning anything. How can that be science? Edmund listened. Those of us who did not visit an early grave remain ill, weak, and hopeless, Addison continued, waiting for our turn. None of the authorities of our time, academia, politicians, the medical establishment, the newspapers, even question the state of man. If you look about us, you see our fellow citizens bent over, vomiting, choking on our discharges while we remain covered with sores that never heal. And we are all told this is normal. This is our species, our fate, they all tell us. Addison had never articulated what he had felt for years, but now he found a growing resolve as he spoke to his dying father. He was describing for the first time something he had felt deep within himself. The freedom he felt as he became known to his father was palpable. The timidness he thought of as a child was finally leaving him. Having never shared his most profound feelings had stunted his growth, but now, as he articulated his opinions with a renewed vigor, it strengthened him considerably. While, naturally, he would welcome his dear father's approbation, it was no longer necessary. "Why should we not question, Father?" Addison continued. "The ways of man. Just because a man stands above us, giving us his orders, dictating our lives, demanding obedience, and not questioning his authority, is that not reason enough to demand justice for all men?" Addison sat back in his chair, fully satisfied with his discourse. He welcomed his father's entreaty that was sure to follow, but he would not retreat. Edmund also sat back in his chair, somewhat bemused by what he saw as the rantings of youth set before his eyes. If the authorities of the day, those who are wise and educated, deem natural the sewer water we drink, then whatever reason would we have to question them, he thought to himself. His son was lost. That was clear. Edmund felt he was listening to the ravings of a madman. Although it was his flesh and blood sitting before him, he did not know this young man. He knew then and there, for the first time, that there was no hope. His son was lost, and there was no retrieval. If even the entreaties of a dying man failed to stir his son to a change of heart, what else did Edmund have to offer? The fate of man was not in his son's hands, Edmund told himself as he looked into his son's eyes. He felt he saw insanity, not genius, sitting across the kitchen table from him. He had given up all hope, but was satisfied that he would not live to see the day his son would come to ruin, and for that, he was grateful. 3 weeks after that discussion around the kitchen table, Edmund Way died a brutal death, as Adele and Addison watched helplessly by his side. Dr. Mangus Atterbury, the young physician of the Crumbly village, assisted the family as Edmund was ushered into the netherworld. The good doctor was out of medical school only a few years ago and was trained in the latest medical theories, so Edmund insisted he be summoned to his bedside whilst he was still lucid and clinging to a life he hoped to extend. "Edmund is here, Doctor." Atterbury in the back room, Adele said as she grasped the doctor's sleeve in an attempt to quicken his pace. "My dear husband is suffering terribly, Doctor." "Atterbury. Can you save him, Doctor?" Without acknowledging Mrs. Way's entreaties, Dr. Atterbury brushed past her, clearly devoid of emotion, and took his place next to Edmund's bed. The sores that had plagued him for years were now ubiquitous, oozing a putrid-smelling semi-liquid that the doctor recognized. He had seen enough late-state victims in his short career as a doctor, and knew Edmund Way had no hope. "Young man," Dr. Atterbury barked in Addison's direction, "be a good chum and fetch some fresh sewer water from the trench across the street with alacrity," as he handed Addison an empty bucket beside Edmund's bed. Self-satisfied with issuing a command, Doctor, Atterbury turned to his patient, secure in the knowledge that his order would be obeyed post-hence. Dr. Atterbury was young, but had already established a reputation among the populace in the village of Crumbly as a physician whose knowledge was vast, education above all, and whose bedside manner was a bit brusque. He had been the family physician of the Ways for a few years now, and was all too familiar with Edmund's condition. However, he was a bit taken aback by the speed at which Edmund's deterioration had progressed in the short time since he last visited the Way household. He immediately opened his black medical bag and began to rummage through its contents until he found the instrument of his liking. "Now, Edmund," Dr. Atterbury began his consultation with his patient. "Look up into my eyes and follow my forefinger," he commanded in much the same manner as he had just dispatched Edmund's son, and began to swing his thusly identified finger to and fro in front of Edmund's nose, while continuing to implore him to follow it. Edmund struggled to follow the forefinger, and finally closed his eyes to bring this useless exercise to a close. Frustrated by his patient's apparent lack of cooperation, Dr. Atterbury took up the tool he had excavated from his black bag, a needle prod, and began to poke the larger sores prominently displayed on Edmund's upper body. After a few well-placed evasive prods, he paused, reached back into his black bag, and pulled out a shiny, razor-sharp lance. Adele shuddered as she saw the doctor's lance emerge from his black bag and turned away. Dr. Atterbury, sensing the discomfort of the patient and spouse alike, turned to Adele to reassure her that he was taking every precaution with her husband. "This is all but necessary, Edmund," Dr. Atterbury said calmly as he plunged the lance into a massive sore on his patient's exposed shoulder. Edmund screamed with pain, making death seem a plausible and welcomed alternative. After carving out discharge from the open wound, Dr. Atterbury swung around to see Addison transfixed. Staring at the doctor he began to see as the embodiment of evil incarnate. He immediately noticed that the young son of Edmund held no bucket overflowing with raw sewage water, passively awaiting further instructions as he had commanded moments ago. "Boy!" shouted the doctor, anger welling up in him. "Where is my sewer water? Do you wish to see your father die in front of you? My command was such and not an idle request. Don't stand there looking like a fool. Fetch the sewer water and bring it to me." The command from the doctor was harsh, and the doctor's overt rudeness shook Adele. After all, she reasoned, the boy's father was dying in front of his son's eyes. How could the doctor expect a young man to leap to his orders? Addison remained motionless and stared back at the doctor who was brutalizing his father in front of him. He never felt such hatred for an individual as he did then. This was a supposed man of science standing before him, whom society looked upon for wisdom and guidance in times like this. Still, this doctor seemed dangerously ignorant to Addison, and he silently and steadfastly refused the doctor's orders and remained resolute in his opposition. "I have no time for this mulishness from a child," shouted the doctor. The word child was purposeful, and he was determined to intermingle an insult with his command, and was successful. Dr. Atterbury turned to Adele, handed her the empty bucket just ripped from Addison's hands, and ordered her in much the same way to fulfill his command. Adele meekly obeyed without any resistance, and brushed past Addison, who had positioned himself as a barrier between the bedroom door and the outer room. She did not make eye contact with her son. Instead, she directed her eyes toward the wood floor to avoid any disagreeable glances from her son. Left alone with this doctor, Addison seethed as he observed the doctor resuming his father's butchering. "You see, son," Dr. Atterbury said as he got into his rhythm, moving from one oozing sore to another as he wielded his sword like a weapon grasped by some medieval knight, carving his enemies on behalf of the king. "This is what medicine is all about." The doctor's demeanor had softened towards Addison, and he decided to teach the young man might be more beneficial than simply ordering him around. "I am helping your father by equally lancing each sore, draining the brown pus from each so I can cleanse the wounds with fresh sewer water." Addison felt that he would never hate another human being more than he hated Dr. Atterbury at that moment. Curiously, his vitriolic hatred did not arise from the doctor's butchering of his dying father. Instead, it emerged from one single source: Dr. Atterbury's lack of desire to know. This was the crime Addison accused him of in his mind. He had always held up men of science as among the most prized members of society and valued them above all else. He admired their seemingly unlimited desire to know and understand the world around them, or so he thought as a youth. Yet, as he approached manhood, he came to the realization that his idolization of scientists was naively idealist and deserved as much respect from him as the scientists themselves. He wasn't the critical thinker that he supposed he was, and he felt ashamed. Meanwhile, Dr. Atterbury continued his torture of Edmund Way. As he moved from one saw to the next, tearing at the dead skin and the discharge emanating from within, he grunted continuously, which irked Addison ever more and only added to his disgust for this doctor. Adele finally returned the fresh sewer water, placed the overflowing bucket of sludge at the foot of her dear husband's bed, and awaited further orders from the doctor. After fulfilling her duty, Adele moved to the side of Adam's bed and held his decrepit hands in her own. She knew his agony and could only pray for his swift journey to the next life to be swift. "This will do it," declared Dr. Atterbury as he lanced the final saw on Edmund's forehead. "Now, for the treatment," said the doctor triumphantly as he placed his lance on the night table beside the bed and moved to fetch the bucket of sewer water that remained motionless at the foot of Edmund's bed. "Watch closely, Addison," Dr. Atterbury said as he hoisted the bucket and balanced it on the night table. "And you might learn something." The arrogance that dripped from the doctor's mouth as he uttered these words was viler than the now sloshing bucket of sewer water resting on the night table. Dr. Atterbury demanded and received a small cup from the kitchen via Adele as she obeyed him again. "Your father told me about your interest in science, Addison," the doctor said as he dipped the cup into the bucket, retrieving about 8 ounces of the putrid water. "Well, science is a worthy pursuit for a young man like yourself." Addison winced unnoticed by the doctor. "When I was a lad like you, I was enamored by the field of science and decided right then and there that I shall become a man of medicine. I told my parents, who, of course, were overjoyed at my choice of profession. I remember my mum telling all the neighbours of my decision. She was so proud of her son. My only regret was that she passed too young and could not enjoy her son's great successes. She suffered the same fate as your father here before your eyes now." Addison was only half listening to the screed by the good doctor, but now his whole attention was garnered by the last remark of Dr. Atterbury. He was stunned. This doctor, a supposed man of science, watched his mum die the horrible death his father was suffering before his eyes, yet the doctor has remained unchanged. He is still treating his patients like his mum was treated by her doctor, and Dr. Atterbury seems unmoved by the ironic comparison. "Is this doctor insane?" Addison thought to himself. Addison did not realize that his very own father had the same thought about him only a few weeks ago, but as his opinion had remained quietly in his mind, Addison never knew about it. As Addison mulled over his question about the doctor, Adele moved closer to her husband's bedside to offer what little comfort she could. Dr. Atterbury took the cup of sewer water and began to fill the gaping holes left from his successful gutting of Edmund's sores. As he filled each empty sore with the sewer water, Edmund screamed in agony. Adele clutched his hands and tried in vain to distract him from the pain, but to no avail. Although Addison certainly knew this was the accepted way to treat these sores as he had witnessed numerous similar scenes with his older siblings growing up, this was the first time he had seen what he characterized as an execution as an adult. It horrified him to the point of nearly driving him insane. He tore at his hair with one large clump falling to the bare hardwood floor, and he stared at his empty hand and worried about his mind for the first time in his life. "I cannot stop this brutality," Addison thought. but I cannot stand here and observe it." He quietly left the room and went out to the street, where he wandered for the better part of an hour. His thoughts swirling now, he attempted to calm himself and took refuge on a bench nestled under a spreading oak tree just a stone's throw from his parents' house. He was far enough away, he thought, that he would no longer hear his father's screams as Dr. Atterbury continued his unrelenting butchering of his father. As he remained motionless on the bench, he noticed a small group of young children running about, playing mindless children's games across the street. There were 3 of them. The oldest could not have been more than 4 or 5 years old. The 2 girls and a boy were chasing each other as children would do, and squealing with joy and peril at the possibility of being caught by each other. Addison watched the children and thought, what will become of their precious lives, living in the world as it is today? The sheer joy of being alive emanated from the 3 of them, which heartened Addison as he observed. As their play continued, the 3 of them edged ever closer to the trench on the side of the road filled with putrid sewer water. "Get back from there!" Addison shouted at the children, who either ignored him as they were deeply involved in their games or simply dismissed his calls for caution. Addison did not know which, so he stood and walked across the street. He confronted the 3 little children and scolded them for playing near that open trench. The 2 girls smiled and ran off, while the little boy looked up at Addison and was horrified, and noticed sores all over this little boy's face and neck. The boy saluted Addison and ran off to join his playmates. Addison stood there, stunned, as he realized that this morbid existence he endured was genuinely universal. These innocent little children had already accepted this life and its dire consequences without objection, and it frightened Addison more than watching his father die. The disconcerting moments with the children near the trench passed, and Addison remembered that his father was on his deathbed. He rushed back to the house and entered his parents' bedroom to find Dr. Atterbury and his mother sitting in chairs opposite Edmund. The lancing of Edmund's sores had concluded, and he was quiet now, and likely unconscious. Addison could see from the doorway, where he remained, the oozing sewer water that filled up his sores. Dr. Atterbury had lanced and filled up the gaping holes that remained with the sewer water Adele had retrieved from the trench. It was the same trench where Addison had his brief encounter with the children moments ago. Here was his father dying before his eyes, while the doctor poured the same sewer water from the trench that he had just warned the young children who played near to avoid. And the 2 disparate incidents struck Addison. He slowly advanced to his father's side to say his final goodbye. As he reached his father, he took his hand and gently stroked it, carefully avoiding the sizable, grotesque sore covering a generous portion of his father's palm. His father did not wake, so there was not another chance for his father to plead with his son to give up his foolish dreams, and for that, Addison was grateful. The brutality of his father's final day at the hands of Dr. Atterbury had thankfully passed, and now he was at peace.
So, we have Addison's dad, Edmund Way, has passed. It was brutal. Dr. Atterbury just did the medicine of the day and butchered him. I think Addison is coming to his own now. He's seeing the barbarity of this way of seeing, of this way of using sewer water. So that concludes Chapter 6 of The Village Idiot. Stay tuned next time. We dive into Chapter 7. So, good night, goodbye, and good luck, and we'll see you next time.